As part of my lectures on history of literature, history of English literature, high Victorian literature, let's focus on the Brownings, on the love couple and the lovebirds, Robert Browning and Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Elizabeth Barrett Browning's passionate outpourings of love poetry in the sonnets from Portuguese, addressed from a woman to a man, publicly recall a powerful private emotional alchemy. The sonnets were written during the courtship of the two poets. Actually, sonnets from the Portuguese was written when they were couple. They were seeing each other. They were dating each other. Robert Browning and Elizabeth Barrett Browning. They were lovebirds. They tweeted a lot in Italy, and they married, and somehow the wife's career fell away, and Robert Browning's career took off. It's pity that whenever a lovebirds get married, that it's a girl who suffers after marriage, and the boy, the husband, always shines in the career. জানি না কেন সবসময় বিয়ের মধ্যে ভালোবেসে বিয়ে হলে দুটো প্রমিসিং পোয়েট বলো বা ইন্টেলেকচুয়ালস বলো বা ক্যারিয়ারিস্ট বলো তাদের মধ্যে সাফার করতে হয় সবসময় মেয়েটিকে, ছেলেটি তার ক্যারিয়ারে ঠিক তুঙ্গে উঠে যায়। Since the time of their marriage, এখানে এটাও ব্যতিক্রম নয়। Elizabeth Barrett Browning was a very promising poet, but she could not fulfill the poetic potentiality that she always had. On the other hand, Robert Browning shined through all the haze and maze of mid-Victorian literature. Since the time of their marriage, Robert Browning's reputation has overshadowed that of his wife, and it is only relatively recently that the real individuality and quality of the work of Elizabeth Barrett has been critically recognized. Her precocious early poetry, including a translation of Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound. It was a very famous translation by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound, and they favorably received the Seraph and other poems, is relatively unadventurous compared to her later work. Following their decision to live in Italy. Now, before you understand the lovebird stay in Italy, the Browning stay in Italy, let me clarify, their stay in Italy had influenced both the Brownings a lot, Elizabeth Barrett Browning and Robert Browning. But I can assure you, a certain kind of Italophilia, mark my word, all my students and all the YouTubers, mark my word, certain kind of word called Italophilia has often used to explain, to illustrate Robert Browning's poetry. And what is Italophilia? Italophilia means a kind of passionate sentiment, emotional affinity, proximity with Italian architecture, Italian painting, and Italian artworks. We have seen Italophilia in Porphyria's Lover. We have seen Italophilia in My Last Duchess. We have seen Italophilia in My Last Ride Together, and also in so many other dramatic monologues of Robert Browning. And this love for Italy, this love for Italian art and painting and sculpture and architecture came to influence Robert Browning and somewhat his wife, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, particularly during their stay in Italy. They stayed in Italy, and that love that came through that stay in Italy. And that's something that later critics identified in Browning as Italophilia or Italophilia. Following their decision, if you remember My Last Duchess, always at the end of the poem, you have a reference of Clause of Innsbruck. I don't know whether you identify or you remember or not, but there is a reference of clause of Innsbruck, and which is the Duke Federer bids the messenger goodbye. But always, Browning always, at least for once, does end up referring to Italian art in one poem or the other. And this Italophilia came from their stay in Italy. And this is the reference that we are talking about right now. Following their decision to live in Italy in 1846, both husband and wife responded variously to the history, the tradition, and the effervescent politics of a nation experiencing a painful evolution into a modern state. And they were unhappy because Italy was losing its artistic sheen and becoming a typical modern day run of the mill city. So they didn't like Italy degenerating into a modern city. And while you can see the same reference also in a movie called La Dolce Vita by Italian director called Federico Fellini, where Robert Browning generally retreated into historical perspectives. Elizabeth Barrett Browning confronted contemporary issues as she had earlier done with English and social problems in her sequence Casa Guidi Windows. Casa Guidi Windows. It's very important. It's very, very, very important. And it's also Elizabeth Barrett Browning's love for Italy that shone through. Casa Guidi Windows. And the poems may lack the Republican commitment of Swinburne and the vivid questioning of Clow. Clow means Arthur Hugh Clow. Uh, uh, but they boldly and intelligently confront Italian political flux and the often contradictory nature of nationalist aspirations. Barrett Browning's most substantial work in every sense is her long blank verse novel, famous, very famous, Aurora Leigh, a poem in 9 books. Aurora Leigh, a poem in 9 books. It was published in 1856. And its verse may not be consistently inspired, and its encyclopedic show of learning may sometimes clog both its imagery and its narrative lines, but it remains a vital, highly original, and outspoken feminist statement. So, Aurora Leigh becomes Elizabeth Barrett Browning's first feminist articulation in mid-Victorian England. Poetry erupts volcanically. So there was a difference between Robert Browning's poetry and Elizabeth Barrett Browning's poetry. Robert Browning's poetry is more calculative, more intellectual, more cerebral. Yes, more cerebral. Whereas, Elizabeth Barrett Browning's poetry is more emotional, more sentimental, and way too volcanic. It's way too volcanic. On the other hand, her husband, her hubby, Robert, is more shrewd, more intellectual, more cerebral, and highly a cerebral poet. In fact, plenty of critics, they like to call Robert Browning a cerebral poet. Cerebral means that the fluid that we have in the head is called cerebrum. So anything that is exclusively intellectual is called cerebral. So in that regard, Robert Browning is correctly identified as a as 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 a tremendously cerebral Victorian poet. Unlike Tennyson, and obviously unlike his wife Elizabeth Barrett Browning. There you go. Poetry erupts volcanically and, like a geological rift, it releases elemental freedom, the freedom that Aurora here and elsewhere enthusiastically embraces. The poem ends confidently with a glimpsed vision of a new dawn reflecting its heroine's name, a new day, which should be built out of heaven to God. Now let's focus. Now this is going to be interesting. Now let's focus on Robert Browning. Robert Browning's own verse novel. This is the uh, uh, first verse novel by Browning, The Ring and the Book. It's a very interesting novel. The Ring and the Book differs radically from his wives. রবার্ট ব্রাউনিং এর বউ যেমন ছিল ইমোশনাল, ভলক্যানিক, টেম্পারামেন্টাল, ব্রাউনিং এর পোয়েট্রি, ব্রাউনিং এর নোভেল, ব্রাউনিং এর ভার্স নোভেল ঠিক ততটাই ক্যালকুলেটিভ, শ্রুড, পলিশড, ততটাই সেরিব্রাল অ্যান্ড টেকনিক্যালি ইন্টেলেকচুয়াল। So Robert Browning's own verse novel, The Ring and the Book, differs radically from his wife's. Browning obliges his reader to play the role of an alert investigating magistrate. তুমি যখন এলিজাবেথ ব্রাউনিং এর কবিতা পড়বে তখন মনে হবে যে তুমি ইউ মাইট মানে বিকাম rapturous, become psychic, become emotionally mad. But when you read Robert Browning, you'd always feel that as a reader, your role is that of an investigator. What am I saying? When you are reading Robert Browning's poetry, your role suddenly becomes, your role means the role of reader becomes the role of তদন্তকারী officer, becomes the role of investigator. You have to investigate into the poem. So you are like the detective, you are like the investigating officer who is looking for clues, the mysteries and everything in his poem. Browning obliges his reader to play the role of an, often most of the students must have read Robert Browning's My Last Duchess. So when you read My Last Duchess, what happens? You see that what happens next? What happened to the wife? What did he do to his wife? What would he say? What kind of order was given to the wife? Why was he so jealous? So almost you feel, I hope you are getting me, almost you feel that you are investigating into the narrative of Browning. And The Ring and the Book is the culmination of the long poetic experiment with the dramatic monologue and of his fascination with the establishment of truth, a truth that can be both objective and subjective, external and experiential. In 1860, Browning had discovered the source of his poem, a collection of documents bound together concerning a sensational Roman murder trial in 1698. Wow, this is awesome. There was a Roman murder trial in 1698. And do you know where Browning get this story from? Browning got this story from one of the bookshops, one of the old bookshops in Italy's Florence. And this chance find on a Florentine bookstall, there you go, this chance find on a Florentine bookstall appealed to Browning's delight in exploring the self-justifying contortions of the minds of sinners and criminals. The Ring and the Book appeared in 4 volumes over a period of many months, thus signaling to its first readers its relationship to the contemporary serial novel. Its relationship to the contemporary serial novel. Now, the contemporary serial novel became very popular because of the demand of market that was increasing during the time. So the serial novel actually is a reference. Serial novel actually is a reference of Browning catering to the demand of market. এখন যেরকম সিরিয়াল হয় না, সিরিয়ালগুলো বন্ধ হয়ে গেছে বলে বাড়ির লোকগুলো আত্মহত্যা করার উপক্রম হয়েছে। ঠিক সেই রকম ব্রাউনিং এর সময়তেও বড় বড় উপন্যাসগুলোকে সিরিয়ালে পার্ট পার্ট করে ওগুলোকে রিলিজ করা হতো, ও যাতে করে বাজারে যে চাহিদাটা রয়েছে সেই চাহিদাটাকে কেটার করা যায় এবং মার্কেটে সার্ভাইভ করা যায়। Because by the time Browning was writing, book writing is not about creative work. It's more about business. It's more about having a relationship with publishers. It's more about having a relationship with your own readers. Remember Charles Dickens. How Charles Dickens used to talk about how Charles Dickens used to talk to his own readers, convince them, ask them, take their opinions, put their opinions in his books, change characters accordingly. Because Dickens was desperately trying to kind of say cater to the increasing demand of market and and be a favorable writer that the readers would love to read. Readers would wait to read him. It's like a movie release. It's like a serial release. It's like a Netflix or Amazon Prime Video release. People are waiting for it. So, no. Yes.
ডেথ নামে একটা মানে আপনার এইরকমই অ্যানিমেটেড একটা সিরিজ আছে যেখানে আপনার মার্ডার সম্পর্কে একটা সিরিজ ওয়াইজ এটা বলা হয়েছে কমপ্লিট একটা।
Yes. Yes. And Browning, exactly. Thank you for the feedback. And exactly this is how Browning tapped the book market and catered to the tastes of the popular public of England. Dramatic lyrics and obviously Bolar Opekha Rakhe na, he is famous for dramatizing the poetry, and the dramatic mode of something that the literature owes it to Robert Browning. The characters of his poetry do not necessarily have to interact with others. I hope everybody knows dramatic monologue. And dramatic monologue is a kind of a technique where the character, one of the characters in the story or in the poetry, he speaks as though there is a silent listener. So that means it becomes almost a dialogue with one person. So since the other party is absent, so it is a monologue. Because for it to be a dialogue, you have to have two people talking to each other. So therefore, it dramatizes, but only one person talks. Much like the conversation between the couples. Only the girlfriend talks and the boyfriend listens. So it's almost like a conversation between dramatic monologue. So, and therefore, Browning initiated this kind of technique in dramatic monologue. And the characters of his poetry do not necessarily have to interact with others, and for the majority are overheard and self-revelatory, is scarcely truth-telling soliloquy. The situations he represents, however, requires a reader's complicity in pralipolipy. For the students and for the other viewers, let me tell you a little bit about pralipolipy. Pralipolipy is a poem by Robert Browning in which there is a painter called Fra, and Fra is a painter who paints inside a Buddhist monk. But at night, Fra leaps from his stairways or from his doorways and goes to brothels, and then spends the night with prostitutes, and just before the sun comes up in the morning, he comes back in the Buddhist monastery. And whenever the head of the monastery requests him to paint Mother Mary or say Eve, Fra always paints the last prostitute that she had sex, that she did have sex on the last night. And the head of the monastery says, "E ki akle tumi? তোমাকে আমি ইভ আঁকতে বললাম, তোমাকে আমি মাদার মেরি আঁকতে বললাম, এটা তুমি কি আঁকেছো? And sometimes Fra tries to paint honestly, but the old last night's picture of the prostitute comes in his head, and he paints, and he paints. So, you know what Browning is talking about? Browning is talking about the relationship between life and art. যদি আর্ট হতে হয় তাহলে তার সাথে জীবনের ডিরেক্ট সম্পর্ক থাকাটা খুব জরুরি।